Well, let me tell you about an all-star game. The players on the all-star game are your teammates for one day. And then the rest of the time, they're going back to trying to be a sniper, you know.
There are 9 hitters Bob Gibson would never forgive. 9 men who looked him dead in the eye, stepped into that batter's box, and refused to flinch. 9 men he called the closest thing he ever had to real enemies on a baseball field. And one of them he once described as a piece of crap for making him feel like he was losing his mind out there. Bob Gibson was the best to ever toe that rubber for the St. Louis Cardinals. But these 9 men made him bleed, made him break, and made him question everything he thought he knew about control. I am Mason, and this is Baseball Icons. If you are enjoying this story so far, go ahead and give this video some hype. It helps more people find this channel and keeps us going. Now let us get back into it. Before we get to the list, you have to understand who Bob Gibson really was. Not the numbers, not the trophies, the man behind all of it. Because none of these 9 matchups make sense unless you understand how Gibson's brain worked and why he took every single at-bat like it was a war. Gibson built a wall around himself on that mound. Not a wall of arrogance, a wall of survival. He refused to talk to opposing hitters. He refused to smile at them. He refused to even look at them like they were human beings once the game started. He called it an unfriendly environment, and he built it on purpose. This was not some accident of personality. This was a choice. A calculated, cold, deliberate choice. He believed that 90% of pitching was mental. He wanted to be inside a hitter's head before the first pitch left his hand. And if you talked to them, if you laughed with them, if you let them see you as a person, you gave away your edge. Gibson would not do that. Not ever. He even refused to let anyone figure him out. Team psychologists, his own manager, sometimes even his own catcher did not know exactly what was coming next. Gibson kept his inner world locked tight because he knew that the moment someone cracked the code, his power would shrink. He was an enigma by design, a puzzle with no solution that he handed out to every batter who stepped in against him. And for most hitters, that puzzle was enough to beat them before the pitch even crossed the plate. He hated the All-Star game, not because he did not want to be there. He was selected over and over because he was simply that good. He hated it because it forced him to share a clubhouse with the enemy. Those were his words. The enemy. He could not just flip a switch and start joking around with the men he had been staring down all season. So he sat in that all-star clubhouse, stiff and uncomfortable, counting the minutes until he could go back to being the most feared man in the National League. Now you have to layer in the world around him. Gibson was a black man pitching in the 1960s. He felt that many people, fans and opponents alike, wanted him to fail. Every game felt like a fight for his place, not just on the mound, in the world. The high and tight fastball was not just a pitching strategy to him. It was a message. This is my territory. You do not get to crowd me. You do not get to push me out. He was reclaiming space that the world kept trying to take from him. Every pitch was personal. Every hit was an insult. Every hitter who dug in and got comfortable was, in his mind, disrespecting everything he had worked for and everything he stood for. That is the man we are talking about. 17 seasons. 251 wins, 3,117 strikeouts, a 2.91 career ERA, 2 Cy Young Awards, 1 MVP, 9 Gold Gloves, 2 World Series rings. A man who changed the rules of baseball, literally, just by being too good. And even a man that dominant, that locked in, that ferocious, had 9 hitters he could never put away completely. 9 men who made him feel something he despised above all else. Vulnerability. Now, we count them down. We start at number 9 and work our way to the one who got under his skin more than any other. The order matters, because the further we go, the deeper the wound gets. Number 9, Pete Rose. Pete Rose was not trying to be a legend when he stepped in against Bob Gibson. He was trying to survive the at-bat. That was the whole game for Rose. Survival first, base hit second. And that grinding, never-quit approach drove Gibson absolutely crazy. Rose did not have the raw power of the other men on this list. He was not swinging for the seats. He was not trying to embarrass anyone. He was just there, stubborn as a weed, fouling off pitch after pitch, making every at-bat feel like it lasted 3 innings. For a man like Gibson, who wanted to destroy you in 4 pitches and move on, Rose was a nightmare. He would foul one back, foul another one back, work the count deep, make Gibson throw extra pitches when Gibson wanted to conserve energy, make him grind when Gibson wanted to dominate. Across their matchups, Rose collected 23 hits against Gibson. 6 of those were doubles. He hit .245 against him with a solid on-base percentage. Those are not small numbers when you consider that many of the bigger power hitters on this list were hitting under 200. Rose figured out that he did not need to hurt Gibson with one swing. He could hurt him over the course of a whole game, draining his pitch count, stealing extra bases, making him work in ways that other hitters simply could not. Gibson respected very few hitters for reasons other than power or raw skill. Rose was one of those exceptions. He respected him the way you respect a persistent problem that never fully goes away. You fix it today, and it comes back tomorrow. That relentlessness was something Gibson understood because he had it too. But when the opponent had it, it became one of the most aggravating forces in the game. Rose was not a piece of crap about it either. He was not showboating. He was not standing at the plate admiring anything. He just kept coming. Keep running. Keep working. And in the end, those 23 hits and 6 doubles meant that Gibson had to admit, even if only to himself, that Pete Rose had figured out something about him that most hitters never did. You do not beat Gibson by trying to overpower him. You beat him by outlasting him. Think about what that means for a pitcher who spent every waking moment trying to dominate through force and will. Rose was not trying to match that force. He was going around it. A foul ball here, a long count there, a hit to the opposite field that Gibson had planned to prevent but could not quite execute. Rose's .245 average kept a pitcher up at night, wondering where the extra pitches went and why every game against Rose felt twice as long as it should have. Number 8, Orlando Cepeda. Now here is where things get strange. Orlando Cepeda was Bob Gibson's teammate. In 1967, they won a World Series together. They shared a clubhouse. They sat in the same dugout. They celebrated together after one of the greatest championship runs in Cardinals history. And then, the moment they were on opposite sides of the field, everything changed. Cepeda hit .261 against Gibson. That is the highest batting average of any of the 9 men on this list. .261. Out of all the Hall of Famers, all the sluggers, all the feared names in the National League, the man who hit Gibson better than anyone was a guy who once called him a friend. That fact alone should tell you something about how deeply uncomfortable Bob Gibson was when he could not dominate someone. Think about what that does to a man like Gibson. He had seen Cepeda up close. He had watched his mechanics in practice. He had talked to him, eaten near him, traveled with him, and none of that knowledge helped. Because when Cepeda dug in against him in a real game, Gibson still could not put him away with any consistency. Whatever Cepeda had figured out about Gibson's approach, he had figured it out from the inside. And no amount of glowering or psychological pressure was going to undo it. Cepeda was a different kind of hitter. He could hit for power, and he could hit for average. He was dangerous in multiple ways, which meant Gibson could not simply set him up the same way twice. The backup slider that befuddled so many other hitters was less effective on a man who had stood next to Gibson in the dugout and watched him throw it to other people. Cepeda knew what it looked like before it ever reached him. Gibson's feelings about Cepeda were complicated. He could not simply hate him the way he could hate a pure stranger, but he could resent the fact that their time as teammates had done nothing to help him shut Cepeda down at the plate. If anything, it made things worse. And in Gibson's world, where every edge mattered and every advantage was precious, that was an unforgivable situation to be in. What made the Cepeda problem so specifically irritating was that there was no clean fix for it. Gibson could study other hitters from a distance and build a mental picture of their weaknesses. With Cepeda, the mental picture was already drawn and it was too complicated. He knew too much. He had seen Gibson's preparation rituals. He had watched Gibson warm up. Cepeda had absorbed all of it and used it the moment they stood on opposite sides of the game. Gibson's highest batting average among all 9 hitters belonged to the one man who had once been his brother in arms. That is the kind of irony that sticks to a man like glue. Number 7, Billy Williams. If Pete Rose frustrated Gibson by grinding, and Cepeda frustrated him by knowing him too well, Billy Williams frustrated him by simply not caring. Not in a lazy way, in the most professional, focused, calm way imaginable. Williams walked to the plate like he was going to pick up his mail. No drama, no posturing, just business. Gibson built his entire psychological approach on making hitters feel the pressure before the pitch. The glare, the silence, the refusal to acknowledge them as human beings. Most hitters felt something when they stepped in against him. Fear, anger, discomfort, nerves. Williams felt nothing, or if he did, he hit it so completely that it might as well have been nothing. Gibson admitted that Williams was almost impossible to intimidate. That is a massive statement from a man whose entire brand was intimidation. Williams hit 5 home runs against Gibson. 5. That is the most of any hitter on the entire list. In 126 plate appearances, Williams went deep 5 times, knocked in 12 runs, and kept his average at 200. For context, most of the heavy hitters on this list were hitting in the 180s and 190s. Williams was not dominant against Gibson, but he was consistent, and he had that power number hanging over every single matchup. The thing that ate at Gibson was not the home runs themselves. It was the reaction after them, or rather, the lack of one. Williams did not flip his bat. He did not stare. He did not stand and watch it go. He just ran, quietly, efficiently. Like, hitting a home run off the most terrifying pitcher in baseball was just another item checked off the to-do list. That kind of calm drove Gibson insane because his whole weapon was psychological. Williams had made himself immune to it. You can imagine how Gibson felt every time Williams stepped in. Here was a man he could not shake, a man who had more power against him than anyone else in the league, a man who went about his work with such quiet professionalism that there was no opening for Gibson's mind games. Williams was the ultimate anti-Gibson hitter, not because he was louder or more aggressive, but because he was completely, utterly, maddeningly calm. Gibson once described wanting to mess with a hitter's head as the heart of his whole approach. He wanted the batter thinking about him rather than thinking about the pitch. Williams never gave him that. Williams thought about the pitch, only the pitch. Where it was going, what kind of spin it had, what it was likely to do by the time it reached the plate. All the glowering and silence and psychological pressure that Gibson poured out from the mound washed off Williams like rain off a tin roof. And those 5 home runs were the proof. Not all 5 came on bad pitches. Some of them came on Gibson's best stuff. Williams had simply recognized it in time, stayed disciplined, and driven it over the fence. 5 times. Against the most dominant pitcher of the era. That is not luck. That is ice running through your veins. Number 6, Willie Stargell. Willie Stargell was a different kind of problem. He was not calm like Williams. He was not a grinder like Rose. He was a force. A left-handed force with a swing like a wrecking ball, capable of turning a perfectly placed Gibson fastball into something that cleared the left field wall without much effort. Stargell only hit 187 against Gibson. That sounds manageable, but look closer. 7 walks. 7 times Gibson decided it was better to put Stargell on base than to throw him something he could hit. For a man who never backed down, never conceded, never showed weakness, 7 intentional or near-intentional walks is a white flag. A quiet one, but still a flag. Gibson knew that Stargell could punish his mistakes in ways that most hitters could not, so he sometimes chose the base over the battle. But here is the moment that links Stargell to Gibson in a way that goes beyond statistics. It was July 15th, 1967, a day that will come up again in a moment with more detail. Roberto Clemente hit a line drive off Gibson's right shin so hard it fractured his fibula, the bone, broken. And yet Gibson stayed on the mound. He refused to leave. And the very next batter he faced, the man who stepped in with the pitcher's leg literally broken and the bones starting to separate, was Willie Stargell. Stargell said later that he could actually hear the bone pop as Gibson delivered the pitch to him. Hear it. Stand there in the batter's box and hear the sound of a broken leg trying to function like a whole one. And Gibson still walked him, still competed, still refused to go down. Stargell, for all his power, could not believe what he was witnessing. It was the most intense thing he had ever seen on a baseball field. And yet, that moment, that impossible display of will, did not make Stargell easier to face in future games. If anything, it meant that Stargell knew Gibson was never going to break. That made their matchups even more loaded with tension. Gibson never forgave Stargell for being a threat he had to manage rather than destroy. The walks said it all. Number 5, Willie McCovey. Willie McCovey might have been the most physically terrifying left-handed hitter Gibson ever faced. At 6 feet and 4 inches, with a swing that could punish any pitch in any zone, McCovey was the kind of hitter that changed how pitchers thought about their entire approach. Against Gibson, McCovey hit 4 home runs and drove in 13 runs. Those are the highest power numbers of any hitter on this list. When McCovey connected, it was decisive. It was damage, and Gibson knew it on every single pitch. 14 walks. McCovey drew 14 walks against Gibson. 14 times Gibson looked at that massive frame in the left-handed batter's box and decided the risk was too high. 14 times he blinked. That is almost unheard of when you are talking about Bob Gibson. This was a man who stared down Hall of Famers for a living, a man who threw inside not as a strategy, strategy, but as a statement of ownership. And yet, McCovey drew 14 walks. That number tells you everything about the fear Gibson had, even if he would never in a million years call it fear. He would call it smart pitching. He would call it tactical thinking. But 14 walks means 14 times he chose not to challenge McCovey with something hittable. McCovey forced Gibson to be perfect. Not just good, not just great, perfect. Because one mistake, one pitch left slightly up or slightly over the middle, and it was gone. That kind of pressure changes a pitcher over the course of a game. It tightens the mechanics. It narrows the margin. And Gibson, who prided himself on pitching with aggression and authority, was forced to pitch differently against McCovey than against almost any other hitter in the league. What made it worse was that even perfection was not always enough. Those 4 home runs did not come on bad pitches. They came on pitches Gibson had placed correctly, and McCovey still hit them out. That is the most humbling thing that can happen to a pitcher of Gibson's caliber. You execute your plan perfectly, and it still is not enough. McCovey was one of the very few hitters in Gibson's career who could make that happen with any regularity. And Gibson could not simply try a different plan with McCovey. Every angle had been thought through. Going away from the big man gave him room to extend his arms and use his full strength. Going inside risked putting something in a spot he could pull. Going soft was inviting contact from a hitter who crushed anything that was not hard and precise. Gibson's entire tactical game was narrowed to a hallway of options. And even when he threaded that hallway perfectly, McCovey sometimes found a way through. 4 home runs, 13 RBIs, 14 walks. Those 3 numbers together paint a portrait of a pitcher doing everything right and still sometimes getting burned, and then choosing not to get burned the next time by not throwing anything hittable at all. Both outcomes represent a kind of defeat that a man like Gibson carries quietly and never truly lets go. Number 4, Frank Robinson. Frank Robinson wanted to fight Bob Gibson every single time he stepped into the batter's box. Not with his fists, with his body. Robinson crowded the plate. He leaned over the strike zone. He positioned himself close, uncomfortably close, daring the pitcher to come inside, daring him to throw a ball that might hit him. And for any other pitcher, that would have been an intimidating posture. For Gibson, it was an act of war. The inside corner of the plate was Gibson's property. He owned it. He defended it the way a landowner defends his fence line. No one was allowed to crowd it. No one was allowed to stand over it. No one was allowed to act like it belonged to them. And Frank Robinson walked up to the plate every single time and claimed it like he owned the deed. Robinson hit 198 against Gibson, 2 home runs, 8 walks. He could not fully crack the code, but he never stopped trying. He never gave an inch. He never stepped back from the plate. He never changed his stance or his positioning. He stood right there, leaning in, daring Gibson to hit him or move him or do something. And that stubbornness, that refusal to concede an inch of territory, is what made Robinson one of the most maddening opponents Gibson ever faced. The moment that burned deepest was September 19th, 1964, a pennant race. The Reds against the Cardinals. The game on the line. Robinson stepped in against Gibson and hit a walk-off home run to give Cincinnati a 7-5 win. Not a garbage time shot. Not a meaningless late season at bat. A walk-off. In the middle of a pennant race, when it mattered more than almost anything. For Gibson, allowing a walk-off to a man who had no business being comfortable in his house was infuriating on a level that statistics cannot capture. Robinson had not just gotten a hit. He had stood on Gibson's corner of the yard, swung from his heels, and walked off while the Cardinals stood there watching. Gibson would carry that one for a long time. What made Robinson's presence even more aggravating was that he never changed. Not game to game, not year to year. He came in with that same crowded stance every single time. He dared you to move him, and when you could not move him, he took what he earned. The walk-off homer in 1964 was the peak, but every at-bat with Robinson felt like a contest of wills that had no clean ending. You could strike him out, and he would come back doing the exact same thing next time. You could walk him, and he would stand at first base looking satisfied, like he had gotten exactly what he wanted. And you could get him out, and he would return to that same spot on the plate next time without any adjustment at all, because he did not feel the need to adjust. Robinson's whole message was that Gibson had not changed the equation, he had only delayed it. That message burned Gibson every time he received it. Number 3, Hank Aaron. Most hitters on this list challenged Gibson with aggression, raw power, or physical toughness. Hank Aaron challenged him with something quieter and, in some ways, more disturbing. Absolute, perfect professionalism. Aaron hit 208 against Gibson, 22 hits in 115 plate appearances. 16 strikeouts, which meant Gibson got him out more than a few times. On paper, Gibson had a reasonable handle on Aaron, but Aaron hit in ways that made Gibson feel like he was always one mistake away from disaster. Aaron did not look like he was swinging hard. He did not grunt or strain or force the bat through the zone. He just made contact. Clean, solid, precise contact that sent the ball hard into gaps or over fences with what appeared to be minimum effort. Aaron understood Gibson's psychology so deeply that he turned his knowledge into a survival guide for younger hitters. He told a young Dusty Baker exactly how to handle facing Gibson. Do not dig into the batter's box. Do not make yourself comfortable. Do not stare Gibson down. And if you hit a home run, do not celebrate until you are completely out of Gibson's line of sight. Run the bases, get to the dugout. Then you can feel good about it. Because if you stand there for even one extra second, if Gibson sees you admiring that ball, he will make the next time you face him an absolute nightmare. That advice was not just practical. It was a map of how Gibson's mind worked, drawn by the man who had studied it more carefully than almost anyone else. Aaron had watched Gibson for years. He had faced him, felt his presence, read his reactions, and figured out that the most dangerous thing you could do was give him a reason to be personally angry at you. Aaron never gave him that reason. He was too controlled, too professional, too smart. That professionalism was what put Aaron on this list. Gibson could handle power. He could handle aggression. He could not handle a man who neutralized his psychological weapons without ever appearing to work at it. Aaron made Gibson's most important tools useless through sheer calmness and intelligence, and Gibson found it almost impossible to forgive. There is also something in the way Aaron's advice survived him. Dusty Baker carried that coaching into his own career as a manager. He passed it along to hitters who never faced Gibson. The instructions Aaron gave became part of the oral history of baseball, a guide to surviving the most intense thing a hitter could experience. And all of that lived on because Aaron had respected Gibson enough to study him and to teach others what he learned. That is a strange kind of honor, and Gibson, being the man he was, could not simply feel flattered by it. Because what it also meant was that Aaron had figured him out completely. And in Gibson's world, being fully figured out was a loss he could never truly accept. Number 2, Roberto Clemente. Roberto Clemente was fearless in the way that only certain rare athletes can be. Not reckless, not stupid, genuinely, completely, utterly fearless. He batted in a stance that looked like he was about to fall off a ladder, lunging and spinning through pitches in a way that broke every traditional rule of hitting mechanics. And it worked, constantly. It worked against pitchers who had spent their whole careers making unorthodox hitters look bad. It worked against Bob Gibson. Gibson could not stand it. He threw a fastball inside on Clemente almost every single time, just to remind him that this was not a playground, just to establish that there were rules in this batter's box, and that one of them was that Gibson owned the inside corner. Clemente absorbed those pitches and kept coming back. He hit .231 against Gibson, 2 home runs, 25 hits, a slugging percentage nearly 30 points higher than his already respectable batting average. Clemente was not just surviving against Gibson, he was thriving. And then came July 15th, 1967. Clemente hit a line drive. It was not a checked swing. It was not a foul ball. It was a full swing line drive hit with everything Clemente had, and it struck Gibson directly on the right shin. The impact was so violent that it fractured his fibula. The bone cracked. A dent formed in the skin in the exact shape of a baseball. And the sound that followed, the sound Stargell heard from the batter's box, was the sound of a man's leg being broken in real time on a Major League Baseball field. Gibson did not fall. He did not call timeout. He did not wave to the dugout. He stood there on that broken leg and pitched to 3 more batters. He walked Willie Stargell. He got Bill Mazeroski to fly out. And then he delivered a 3-2 pitch to Don Clendenin. The rotation on that final pitch, the full extension, the follow-through, the force of that delivery snapped the bone cleanly in 2. Only then did Gibson go down. He was carried off the field on a stretcher. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he blamed Clemente. Not fairly. Clemente had done nothing wrong. He had swung a bat. He had hit a ball. That is baseball. But for Gibson, the fact that Clemente's fearlessness had put him in that position, had forced him to pitch on a broken leg just to prove he was not beaten, was something that settled into his memory and never left. Clemente was the man who broke Bob Gibson and did not even know it. That is the cruelest kind of opponent to have. Number 1, Willie Mays. Willie Mays is the only hitter on this list who Bob Gibson openly called the greatest all-around player he ever faced. He said it with respect. He said it with awe. And underneath both of those things, he said it with the simmering frustration of a man who could never fully conquer the one opponent he most wanted to conquer. Their matchups were intellectual warfare. That is the only phrase that captures it. Two of the most brilliant baseball minds of their generation, standing 60 feet apart, trying to outwit each other on every single pitch. Mays had a baseball IQ that allowed him to adjust on the fly in ways that most hitters simply could not. Gibson developed his backup slider, a pitch that broke in the opposite direction from what hitters expected, and it wrecked most of the league. Mays figured it out. He made adjustments to that slider that neutralized much of its effectiveness. He did not stop it completely, but he reduced it. He cut into its power. He refused to let it beat him the same way twice. Mays hit 198 against Gibson across 101 plate appearances, 30 strikeouts. So Gibson did get him out. More often than not, Gibson came out ahead. But here's the thing about Mays that you cannot put in a box score. He was never scared. Not once. Not even for a single second. Gibson could glare at other hitters and watch something shift in their eyes. Some doubt, some hesitation, some tiny crack in their confidence. With Mays, nothing shifted. Mays had seen Gibson's act for what it was, a tool, a method, a performance designed to gain a mental edge. And Mays found it almost amusing. Think about what that does to a man who has built his entire identity around psychological dominance. You have crafted this persona. You have spent years turning yourself into the most frightening presence on a baseball field. And Willie Mays steps into the All-Star Game dugout and looks at you with that smile, that knowing smile that says he sees exactly what you are doing and finds it more interesting than threatening. Gibson could not stand it. The 9 strikeouts Gibson notched against Mays in All-Star play were wins he treasured. Not because they were team victories, because they were personal ones. Because they were the rare moments where he could say, at least for one pitch, one at-bat, I had Willie Mays. And Mays still came back, still adjusted, still found new ways to challenge him. That is what put Mays at the top of this list. Not the stats, not the home runs, not any single moment. The fact that across their entire careers, Gibson never once felt like he had truly defeated him. He had beaten him plenty of times, but defeating him was something else entirely. Mays represented everything Gibson feared most in an opponent, a man whose intelligence matched his intensity, who could not be bullied or bluffed or broken. The backup slider that Gibson had refined over years of work, that pitch he had mastered by altering his arm slot and throwing it like mad, that pitch that broke bats and confused some of the best hitters in the game, Mays made adjustments to it. He saw the spin. He recognized the difference between the version that broke away and the version that did not. He adapted in the middle of at-bats in real time using a baseball intelligence that Gibson respected and resented in equal measure. Every adjustment Mays made was a message that said your best trick is no longer a secret. And Gibson had no answer for that, except to come up with something new. 17 seasons of trying to stay one step ahead of Willie Mays is the reason Bob Gibson kept pushing himself deeper than almost any pitcher in the history of the game. Gibson had made the pitch unpredictable in the most destructive way possible. And the sport had to respond. After the 1968 season, Major League Baseball lowered the pitching mound. Not because they wanted to, because they felt they had to. The game was becoming unwatchable. Hitters were helpless. The mound lowering was designed specifically to reduce the advantage that pitchers like Gibson had built, to reduce the angle, to bring the hitters back into the conversation. Gibson loved that. Not the rule change itself, but what it meant. It meant he had pushed the game so far that the game had to change its structure to accommodate the hitters. He had broken the system, and he had done it on purpose, with full awareness, chasing perfection so aggressively that the sport itself had to renegotiate its own terms. Now bring it all together. 9 hitters, 9 men who, across 17 seasons, were the ones he could never fully eliminate. Gibson never forgave any of them. But here is the thing. Forgiveness is not something you offer to people who did not do anything wrong. These 9 men competed. They showed up. They refused to be broken. They brought their best when his best was on the table. And Gibson, the man who could not forgive, was also the man who understood better than anyone what it meant to refuse to surrender. He could not forgive them, but on some level, buried deep under all that competitive rage, he knew exactly what they were. They were the only ones who had been truly worthy of him. And that is a different kind of respect than the kind you say out loud. His intensity was real. His grudges were real. His refusal to be warm or approachable or forgiving was also real. He was not an easy man. He was not a comfortable man to be around on a baseball field. He made the sport harder for everyone who faced him, including the greatest hitters of his era. And that is a form of greatness, even if it came wrapped in something cold and uncompromising. But here is what you have to remember when all the stories are told. Gibson's career statistics stand on their own. 251 wins, 3,117 strikeouts, 2 World Series rings, the year he broke baseball, 9 Gold Gloves. Every one of those achievements was built on the foundation of competitive fire that these 9 men helped create. Because the only way to stay that focused, that sharp, that relentless for 17 years is to have genuine rivals. People who push you to places you would not go alone. These 9 hitters gave Gibson a reason to be that good for that long. And Gibson gave them some of the most intense, memorable at-bats of their entire careers. Even if none of them would say it quite that way. Because saying anything kind about Bob Gibson was something you did carefully and quietly, preferably when he was not in the building. That is the story. 9 men, 1 pitcher, and a piece of baseball history that will not be matched in any of our lifetimes. Which of these 9 hitters do you think would have driven you the craziest to face as a pitcher? Drop it in the comments. And if you have not already, subscribe and leave a like so we can keep bringing you deep dives into the icons of the game. We will see you in the next one.